Hello ladies and gentlemen, this is a short video on some of the attributes for our area light that you guys might want to mess around with. I'm just going to cover a few basics here. I have a very basic scene set up with a simple plane, a sphere, and an area light. The area light is, you can set up your area lights through here if you do not know where to go and add a light to your scene. So starting out, this is at its default settings. I've just moved it a little over and changed its direction to point towards the sphere. If we are to look at our render view, this is what it looks like, and this is probably not how you want to showcase your model. So the first and the very obvious attribute that we are going to change is the intensity and the exposure of the light. In case you do not see the attributes of the light, you have to select the light, and if you're on the channel box editor, you can probably change some of the things from here. However, you can get more attributes from here. You can see more details like in the attribute editor. So starting out, the first thing I'm going to change is the intensity. I increase the intensity, and you can see how that affects that. There's only a certain, if you think that there's only a certain limit to how much you can increase the intensity, that is not true. You can change this to 20 and it'll affect your scene accordingly. The other thing that you can adjust is the exposure, and as you can see that affects your scene accordingly. Now, once your render is complete, in your render view, you'll see that it gives you a timestamp as to how long it takes for your single image to render out. If I zoom into my scene here, you will see that the shadow currently right now, it has a lot of noise. You probably want to get rid of that. So in order to do that, what you want to do is, if you scroll down in your attribute editor, you'll see something called samples. You can increase that, and immediately you will see that the noise no longer here is bad at all. So this is still rendering. As you can see over here, it says rendering. So once the render is complete, you will see that this looks significantly better, and so do these areas. I'm just gonna wait for it to finish. And once it's done, you can see that everything looks a lot smoother now. So that's one thing that you probably want to tweak. You do want to keep in mind that the more number of samples you have, if this is a high number, it's going to take a lot longer for your scene to render. As you can tell, that the last scene rendered a lot faster, and this is still rendering. So be mindful of how you use this. Another thing, so this took about almost a minute for it to render, and this is again without any materials or any reflections and stuff. So if this had materials on it, it would probably take much longer, and depending on your geometry as well. The other thing that, and in order to compare your renders, there's something that you can do. It's always good to do a sort of a comparison whenever you're adjusting these values. You can go to your view and you can store your snapshot, and this way it'll save your current view. So now you can sort of do a comparison. Now I've lowered that and it's rendering, and as soon as it's done rendering, I can go here and store the snapshot, and I can sort of do a comparison between what the two images look like. As you can see, this area has a lot more noise. The next thing that you probably want to do, I'm just gonna up this a little, and if you want to, now you can see that you do not see your render view, so you have to, like, if you have clicked on a snapshot, just click on it again, and then it'll bring the render view here. The other few things that I want to talk about is the spread. This is like how your light is spreading from your light source. So if I were to change that, we know that our lights, the area light is basically a square, and you can see how it affects our sphere as well, and how this is affected as well. So that's something that is also something that you might want to adjust based on your needs. And then there is a lot of the times in a natural environment, you are not going to have a completely dark shadow. You're going to have some, it's not going to be completely black, as light is reflected off of other surfaces, and you'll see another shade of it. So you can adjust the color here, and you can click on it and change the color according to like what your material here is. You can make those adjustments. Now another thing that you would notice here is that there's noise in these areas now, and that happened because we changed the spread of the light. So based on how that looks, the noise also changes. So I'm gonna go back down here, and there are certain things that you can do to fix that too, to remove that noise. I'm first going to let this render so we can do a sort of a comparison by saving the snapshot. And once it says that it's done, I am going to go ahead and store snapshot. And now in our render settings, there are a few things, the sampling and whatnot, that we can actually adjust. So I believe what you want to adjust here is the diffuse settings. So if I were to increase that, and I'm going to give it some time to render out. Let's increase it a little more, but you can see that that's starting to get a little better. So if I were to increase that even more, it's going to start looking better and better. So these are also certain settings that you can adjust. There are some other settings here, the ray depth and whatnot, that you can also tweak, and I'm going to let this render out so we can sort of do a comparison between this one and the one with our diffuse increased in our render settings, to see how that affects the overall noise. So this is done, so I'm going to go ahead and store this snapshot, and if we see, this has a lot more noise in comparison to this, so that gives us an idea. So if I were to increase the diffuse here, that will also affect our render a certain way. So let's see what that does if I increase that. So you're probably gonna notice a little more noise, I think. I mean, I usually just like tweak the values and do a comparison and then readjust the setting if that's not what I need. So if I save this now, store snapshot, you can see it didn't make much of a difference actually, but I think it makes a difference based on like what this value, the maximum of this value. If I were to lower this, however, and click off of this now, you can see that this is making a difference when it comes to that. Yeah, so that's how it makes a difference. Anyway, that is some of the basics as to how you would want to work with your lights. The last thing that I want to mention here is if you want to change the color of your light to make it look a little more warmer, you can do that too. you can either click on the color and select a color or add the values here, or you can attach a file to it. So if I were to attach something like this to it, and I can see how that affects my scene, and I can save this also once it's done rendering, and that way I get a sort of a warmer light, and you can control this too as to how bright and you can adjust the brightness and the exposure on this too. So this is done rendering, so if I were to save this now, store snapshot, and go back to my light and increase the intensity and the exposure, you can see how that affects the my scene basically. So that's it for this video. If you guys have any other questions, please feel free to text me or reach out. Thanks for watching.